era. Before we go any further, I just want to check something. Are you an atheist?
For all practical purposes, yes. Nobody can actually say for certain that anything doesn't exist. But I'm an atheist in the same way as I'm an a-leprechaunist and an a-fairyist and an a-pink unicornist.
So you're not 100% sure God doesn't exist, but you're sure enough to make it practically...
I'm as sure as you are sure that fairies and leprechauns don't exist.
And do you see an equivalence between the idea of God and the idea of a fairy and a leprechaun?
The evidence for both is equally poor.
You say in The God Delusion, one of my favourite sentences that jumps out of the page, that the God of the Old Testament is a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capricious, malevolent bully. As a piece of rhetoric, superb. But do you really believe that?
Congratulations on getting megalomaniacal right, by the way. Most people fumble on that. Yes, if you've actually read the Old Testament, I think you would have to agree. It's hideous. It's an the God of the Old Testament who is a monster.
But also the God of the Quran, the New Testament, the Hindu scripture?
Well, the God of the Quran, I don't know so much about. The God of the New Testament is widely advertised as being a bit more gentle. And certainly, on the whole, he is. There are things about the New Testament that I find, in a way, almost more objectionable than the Old Testament. But the sheer horror of the character, I said he was the most unpleasant character in all fiction, because I regard it as fiction, of course. And yes, he is. I mean, he's jealous, he's vindictive, he's callous, he's cruel.
And yet this is a God that is worshipped by, loved by, adored by, well, followed by millions, billions of people.
I hope not. I hope that the God that is adored by millions of people is a grown-up kind of God who is no longer... I hope that most people who... the kind of people I would like to know who worship and admire him regard those stories as not literally true. Now, there are some who do regard them as literally true, and I suspect they either haven't read the Old Testament or they're not the kind of people I would wish to know, because you do not want to worship a character like that. By all means, worship some kind of great spirit of the universe, some kind of creative intelligence who created the universe, but don't worship this vile, vindictive monster of the Old Testament.
Why throw around these sweeping statements about religion? Not the God of the Old Testament, but religion itself being evil. I mean, do you believe religion is evil?
No.
But you say plenty of times in this book that religion is evil. You said in a speech famously that I think a case can be made that faith is one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate.
I do think that, yes. Because what I'm talking about there is faith, where faith means belief in something without evidence. Because if you believe something without evidence, then that justifies anything. You're no longer vulnerable to somebody coming back at you and saying, hang on a minute, let me argue the case. If you believe it without evidence, which is what faith is, then you don't argue the case. You say, no, I'm not arguing that case. This is my faith. It's mine. It's private. I don't dissent from it. I don't retreat from it. You're just going to have to accept it. Now, that is evil.
And yet you spend so much of your time debating people of faith. So clearly people of faith are interested in having discussions. They're not just all blind believers insisting on their way of...
Well, nobody said anything about all of them. I mean, the vast majority of religious people are perfectly good, nice people, as you are. There's no suggestion I've ever made that all religious people are evil. Of course not. There is a logical progression that goes from believing in faith, having faith that your God tells you to do something, and doing terrible deeds, like suicide bombing, like flying planes into skyscrapers. The vast majority of people of faith don't do such terrible things. But those people who do terrible things do it believing that they are righteous and good, and they think that they're doing the will of their God. So they're not evil people, they're actually good people by their own lights. They believe they're doing good things, and that's why religion is evil, because it can make you do evil things believing that they are good.
Do you really believe that people who go out and carry out suicide bombings, it is faith? religion is to blame. Not geopolitics, not the world, not their lives, not what's going on around us. It's religion, plain and simple.
Not always. It's not in the case of the Tamil Tigers, for example. But I think in a great majority of cases it is, and I think it certainly makes it a hell of a lot easier. The evidence is plain that in many Islamic suicide bombers, you talk to them, those who fail, you talk to them afterwards, they've got paradise on the brain. They're desperate to go to a martyr's heaven. And that's what they think about.
Professor Robert Pape of the University of Chicago studied every known case of suicide terrorism, 315 cases. And he came to the conclusion that there's, quote, little connection between suicide terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism or any of the world's religions. The taproot of suicide terrorism, he says, is nationalism. It's about land, it's about power, it's about politics. It's not about faith. Faith is just a cover. What do you know that he doesn't know?
Well, I've seen other evidence. There are different people say different things. I've seen plenty of testimonies of suicide bombers who have said precisely that they do it because they want a martyr's paradise.
Do you include the 7/7 bombers in that case as well?
Yes, I believe so.
Have you watched their suicide videos?
I'm not sure that I have, no.
They talk about Afghanistan, they talk about Iraq, they talk about crusades, they talk about war between the West and the Muslim world, they talk about invading armies. I mean, there's a lot of real world stuff in there. I'm not saying, of course not, that faith doesn't play a role, but I'm just interested in this idea that you think faith is the issue. You said in a very famous column you wrote 4 days after 9/11 that this came from religion.
There are enormously good reasons for people to take political action, and this we see in Northern Ireland, we see it in Afghanistan, we see it in Sri Lanka, where the Tamil Tigers operated. So yes, there are political reasons, but the promise of a martyr's heaven, which is, you cannot deny that this is part of Islamic doctrine. Martyrs go straight to paradise.
Yes, but not terrorists, not murderers, not criminals.
Well, they believe that because they're told it by their imams.
But then what about the majority of the world's Muslim clerics and ulama who came out and condemned 9/11 straight afterwards?
Well, I'm delighted they did, but they were pretty quiet about it.
What about the argument that says human beings are prone to violence? They're prone to carrying out crimes against their fellow man. You can blame religion, you can blame politics, you can blame economics, lots of factors, lots of excuses. What I don't get is, why do you only focus on religion? For fairness, why don't you also isolate the other factors?
There are lots of other factors, and I'm quite happy to say that, yes. There are lots of, I mean, if you look at the wars of history, some of them have been about religion, plenty of them have not been about religion. I never said religion is the sole cause of wars and violence.
You may not have said that, but you would accept that the new atheists, people like Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens, have blamed a lot of history's wars on God and religion, and you make a similar suggestion in The God Delusion.
Yeah, I would blame a lot of history's wars, but the most terrible wars in history, the two major wars of the 20th century, are nothing to do with religion.
You accept that point?
Yeah, of course.
And the Cold War and Vietnam?
Yes, I would, of course, yes.
So when you have a situation where some of the world's worst crimes were carried out not by believers, how then does that square with your idea that it's religion that causes good people to do bad things, it's religion that's driving violence, your original statement against religion at the start of this?
Dogmatic belief in something like religion or something like Marxism or something like Nazism, these are all, or indeed patriotism, I mean, my country right or wrong, these are all pernicious beliefs which can drive people to do terrible things. And in the Second World War, Hitlerism was driven by racism, by a sort of sub-Wagnerian pagan religion which Hitler revived. Stalin's atrocities were motivated by a dogmatic belief in Marxism.
And atheism.
Stalin happened to be an atheist, but he was never motivated specifically.
The Soviet Union was not based on scientific rationalism, on the elimination of religion and God?
Stalin persecuted the church. Stalin persecuted just about everybody.
Are you saying that the Soviet Union, the leaders of the Soviet Union, were not driven by a hatred of religion and a belief that science and human progress and materialism was the way forward?
They believed that materialism, science, human progress, those are kind of there was a Marxist slant on those words, and they were hideously misused.
Mao Zedong, when he invaded Tibet, told the Dalai Lama that religion is poison. The subtext to the late Christopher Hitchens' book was religion poisons everything. Can you blame people of religion for saying, hold on, we've heard these ideas before, that religion poisons everything and it leads in one direction?
It's an incidental fact that Mao Zedong and Stalin happened to be atheists. They
Incidental,
were not.
it wasn't core to communism.
I think it was not core to communism, no.
So when Karl Marx was talking about religion being the opiate of the masses, that was just a throwaway line.
Yeah, I mean, that was an out of context statement. I mean, what on earth do you think that's got to do with atheism? I don't know.
Let me put a statement in context to you. Albania, one of the world's worst dictatorships, tyrannies that we've seen in the last 100 years. Article 37 of Albania's communist constitution declared, quote, "The state recognizes no religion and supports atheistic propaganda in order to implant a scientific, materialistic world outlook in people."
What do you think you're saying? I mean, that's an appalling thing to say. Of course it is.
Why is that an appalling thing to say? What do you disagree with in that statement?
Why would I want to support atheistic propaganda? I support science and truth.
But you don't support spreading atheism.
I support spreading science and truth. If that happens to be atheism, I support it. I'm not going to start bullying people into being atheist. I'm not going to start trying to compel people to be atheists. That was what the Albanians were doing. It's nothing to do with what I want to do.
Of course, but you'd like to persuade them not to be believers and become atheists.
I'd like to raise consciousness in a gentle, civilized way, using argument, rational argument, from evidence.
In your book, you cite lots of evidence for the bad things religion's done. What I wonder is, if you were being fair, wouldn't you have also included some of the good things that religion's done?
My passion is for scientific truth. I don't much care about what's good and evil, actually. I care about what's true. I mean, do you actually believe in your Muslim faith? Do you believe that Muhammad split the moon in two? Do you believe that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse, for example? I'd pay you the compliment of assuming that you don't.
No, I do. I believe in miracles.
You believe that?
Yes.
You believe that Muhammad went to heaven on a winged horse?
Yes, I believe in God. I believe in miracles. I believe in revelation. I mean, the point here is that let's assume I'm wrong, Richard. I'm wrong.
Let's
assume I'm wrong. I'm wrong. I'm happy to concede that, Richard. I'm happy to concede it. I'm wrong. All religions are wrong. God does not exist. We're all mad. The issue is we exist. We've existed for a while. I think even Christopher Hitchens said, and you've said in your writings, we're not going anywhere. So my question to you is, why not acknowledge, for example, the good things that religion has done? Do you accept that religion has done good things, despite all of our mad beliefs and our miracles?
I accept that individual religious people have done an enormous number of good things.
Not driven by religion?
Well, I mean, who knows?
You're very mean-spirited. You won't give any credit at all.
Take somebody like Martin Luther King, for example.
Reverend Martin Luther King.
Yes. Obviously, he was a cleric. I imagine that fed into the good things that he did. Plenty of other things did. He was a great admirer of Gandhi, and he was a great admirer of non-violence. He was a brilliant and wonderful, great man.
Would you disconnect MLK's non-violence and Gandhi's non-violence from their very strongly held religious beliefs? They didn't.
Well, I think it's not a thing that I really care about, actually. I mean, I think they were...
You do care about it, Richard. You're saying that people carry out violence in the name of God, and I cite to you an example of very famous people who have done good and non-violence in the name of God, and you say, I'm not interested.
If God doesn't exist, then doing something good in his name it's great that something good gets done, but there's no evidence at all that believing in God makes you more likely to do good things. I can't see any noble, logical connection between being religious and doing good things.
Let's concede that God does not exist. Let's concede that religion is false. My problem here is trying to understand why some of the new atheists are so anti-religion when religious people clearly are doing lots of good things and they're doing it in the name of God.
I've never denied that religious people are doing good things and non-religious people are doing good things. I care about what's true. I'm an educator, I'm a scientist, and I want people to understand the truth about the universe in which they live. That's what I care about. And I regard religion as a distraction, and in some cases a pernicious distraction from true education, which I love and value the way you value and love your God.
Can you not do both?
Well, so long as they don't contradict
each other.
Richard.
Richard.
As long as they don't contradict each other. But if you actually believe Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse, that's an anti-scientific belief.
And that could be wrong.
But that bloody well is wrong.
But that doesn't change. That doesn't change. How do you know it's wrong?
Oh, come on. You're a man of the 21st century.
No, I'm just asking. It comes back to my original question. The rational position is the agnostic. The rational position is the agnostic position.
Why up there? What, I mean,
the rational position. I didn't say up there. I didn't pick a place.
Okay,
you
well,
picked a place.
why would a winged horse be the way to get to heaven if it's not up there?
I asked a question about. You asked about proof. I'm all for saying I can't prove it, but can you prove he didn't do it? I mean, this is the end-all debate.
Didn't fly to heaven on a winged horse?
I'm just asking on your criteria. I'm just asking on
No, I can't prove it, and I can't prove it wasn't a golden unicorn.
But I'm fascinated that you're rather talk about what animals the Prophet may or may not have used 1400 years ago, rather than talk about what Muslims or Islam is doing in the world today, good or bad.
Well,
that seems to be the distraction. If anyone's distracted, it seems to be you.
Well, that's your view. I'm fascinated by how somebody, a respected, sophisticated journalist in the 21st century, can believe that a prophet flew to heaven on a winged horse.
Let me ask you this. Are all people who hold beliefs in God and in miracles and the supernatural, do you regard them all as intellectually inferior to you?
I regard those beliefs as intellectual nonsense. I don't regard the individuals as intellectually inferior to me, because many of them palpably are not. If you go back in history, then all bets are off, because before Darwin, for example, it is not at all surprising that before Darwin people believed in all kinds of things which they wouldn't believe in now. There are many people, many scientists today who say they're religious. And if you actually ask them what they believe, in many cases it turns out what they believe is in some sort of deistic God, some sort of intellectual spirit, some sort of creative intelligence that lay at the root of the universe, perhaps invented the laws of physics, something like that.
I don't agree with this book, but it's an excellent book, very well argued. You're very passionate, clearly. There's one section in the book where you talk about bringing up children.
Oh, yes.
And you talked about education. You talk about a story when you tell a story about being in Ireland and talking about the Catholic child abuse scandal. And there's one quote on page 356, which I will read out to you. Horrible as sexual abuse no doubt was, the damage was arguably less than the long-term psychological damage inflicted by bringing the child up Catholic in the first place. You believe that being brought up as a Catholic is worse than being abused by a priest?
There are shades of being abused by a priest, and I quoted the example of a woman in America who wrote to me saying that when she was 7 years old, she was sexually abused by a priest in his car, and at the same time, a friend of hers, who also 7, who was Protestant, or was of Protestant family, I should say, died. And she was told that because her friend was Protestant, she had gone to hell and would be roasting in hell forever. And she told me that of those 2 abuses, she got over the physical abuse. It was yucky, but she got over it. But the mental abuse of being told about hell, she took years to get over. And
with respect, Richard, you're an empiricist, you're a rationalist. One letter from one woman in America isn't really the basis to extrapolate and make such a sweeping conclusion.
That is, of course, true. And I'm not basing it on that. It seems to me that telling children such that they really, really believe that people who sin are going to go to hell and roast forever, that your skin grows again when it peels off with burning. It seems to me to be intuitively entirely reasonable that that is a worse form of child abuse, that will give more nightmares, that will give more genuine distress, because they really believe it. If they don't believe it, it's not a problem, of course.
You also say...
Let me just... I mean, I've been put on the spot about this health fire thing.
We haven't really been put on the spot. In what sense have you been put on the spot?
Well, I sense that you think it's somehow obvious that having a priest, if you're a small girl, having a priest put his hand...
I would be very interested in asking the audience whether being told about heaven and hell as a child, being brought up as Catholic, is worse than being abused by a priest.
Okay.
Let's have a show of hands. Okay. Is it worse to be abused by a priest And if you believe it's worse for a priest to abuse a child than to bring up your child Catholic, raise your hands. Are they both as bad as each other? Raise your hands. So we have a three-way split in the audience. Let's finish this section with one last related subject on this question, a personal question from me. You talk about how to teach children that there is one God, or that God created the world in 6 days, that is child abuse. To even teach your children religion is child abuse. So, I have a daughter. I teach her about Islam and the horse. Am I guilty of child abuse?
Do you teach her the world was created in 6 days?
No, because Islam doesn't teach that, Richard.
I'm delighted to hear that.
I ask again, am I guilty of child abuse for teaching my child stories from the Quran?
No,
yes
you
or
are
no?
not. No.
Good to know. Yeah. We are going to talk more about science, and we're going to go back to the audience to ask some questions to Professor Dawkins in part 2. We'll be back after the break.